Well, anyway, I signed up for this Silva mind control class because I wanted to go to a grocery store and remember a list of 45 items. And they said, mnemonically, you can do that by taking this course. Well, I got that, but I also got a lot more than that. They did something called doing cases, where someone would give you the name of somebody and said, this person's got some kind of health problem. Go down to level, visualize this, tell us what's going on. I did that. My first case, I saw nothing but a bolt in this woman's knee. And I thought, I can't do this. So I said, well, all I'm getting is a bolt in a woman's knee. And he said, yeah, that's what it was. She had had surgery on her knee, and they inserted a piece of metal in there. And I thought, ooh, what's that about? And we kept doing these cases. And people were getting them right, and there were a lot of errors, but there were a lot of them that were right on. And I thought, this is statistically not likely. So I was at Rice at the time, and I said, well, I'm going to go back to the psychology department and see what they say about this. And what I encountered was kind of like this concept that, well, this is crap for the National Enquirer, that there's nothing really to it. But I thought, no, statistically, what are the odds of all these things happening accurately? And I ran into what was kind of a bias against spirituality and science. Hi, Bruce. I didn't know you were here. And a distant relative of mine, when I got the Ph.D. in parapsychic science, she told me, she said, Gary, don't tell anybody. That's embarrassing. And I thought, it's not embarrassing. But it was that scientific bias, which is such a part of our culture. And it still is. But it's going away. But there's kind of still that attitude that science and religion and spirituality are separate things and they do not come together. So the road ahead on this little talk, whether I can use the video or not, has got really 4 parts. The first part is what cosmology says about our universe, that it actually shouldn't exist given the odds of what we know about the expansion of the universe, about atomic forces, about several phenomena that say we are not supposed to be here unless there was some kind of intention behind it. The second part is what statistics says about psychic abilities. We don't know a lot about what's going on psychically, but statistically we know that it's got to be real, because there have been thousands of studies over decades in which the probabilities are almost impossible to just happen randomly. So psychic phenomena are real, but I will address things like, well then if that's true, why are psychics making so many mistakes? Or why can't they win the lottery? Then I'm going to look at what decades of research tell us about survival of consciousness after death. Something that religious traditions maintain is real, but science has always said, no, consciousness is created by the brain. When we die, it's over. Not so much anymore. What's going on in quantum physics, there are several indicators that consciousness continues. The last part is certain personal things that happened to me over my life, and little stories, and I hope to have some time to get into those. That's my dog Daisy, and it's not so much about Daisy, but there's a little bit about Daisy too, because animals have psychic abilities as well that a lot of research has shown recently. But it's more about, you know, what kind of background I had. My mother was rather psychic. She would have dreams, and you know, one time I was at work on a Friday morning and she called me up. She said, what happened last night? I had a dream that you and your brother went on a freeway. I was living in Washington, D.C. She was living in El Campo, Texas. My brother was living in Austin, Texas. He had come to a medical school interview in New York City and asked me to go pick him up on a Thursday night in New York City so he could spend the weekend with me. I drove from Washington, D.C. to New York City, drove back, and went to work on Friday morning. And my mother called me up at work saying, I had this vivid dream, you and Charles on a freeway. What's that about? She never called me at work, especially on a Friday morning, and especially with something like that. My mother would get that stuff. In 1989, my mother witnessed the miracle of the sun, which was witnessed around Texas. There was a Catholic church in Lubbock where they had miracles happening, and on a given date, something was supposed to happen in 1989. My mother, spiritual woman, but very practical, very bohemian. It was like, oh God, those people are going up to Lubbock and they're going to be sicker when they come back than they went up there in this heat. It was August. And as soon as she said that, she was taking care of Ashley, who was 2 years old at the time, and she saw the sun spinning out of the corner of her eye. It was red and blue, and she said it was spitting, and she said she was just enthralled and looked at it for about a minute. She said, I couldn't believe it. And she said, oh, Ashley's in the house. I better go take care of her, check on her, because she was hanging clothes. And she said she came back out again and she looked up at the sun and there was no way she could see it. But she had stared at it for about a minute. And she said, and then she didn't want to tell anybody, but there were stories all over Texas where some people had seen it and most people had not. But it was all over the Southwest that day, and the people who had were kind of amazed by it. So there was something happening there. That's the kind of background I had. And of course, when I was in the Jesuits, I had the 30-day silent retreat, which had its own form of magic. I ended up on the side of a mountain at one time, deep in prayer, and I was walking along this trail in Los Padres National Forest in California, near Santa Barbara, which is where the novitiate was. And I found myself holding on to the side of a mountain. And I thought, how did I get here? And also, how do I get down from here? So I started to figure out how I could step back down, but to this day I have no idea how that happens. So there's certain kind of things going on where you can lose your mind in prayer. Whether that has anything to do with science, I don't know. But anyway, that's some of my background. My aunt had a near-death experience in the 1970s, when before it was Raymond Moody had come out with all the research on it, and she wouldn't tell anybody. She told my mother. My mother told us, but she was embarrassed by it. And then when all the research was happening, she'd seen her father and her deceased brother, and they'd all told her it wasn't her time, and so near-death experiences tell us a little bit about what science, or at least experience of people's lives, is showing about perhaps consciousness survival. Our unlikely universe. I was talking about the odds of our universe existing. There's a mathematical cosmologist by the name of Brian Swimme, and he took a look at the rate of expansion after the Big Bang. And he says with atomic forces, the strong and weak bonds between atoms, he said, had the rate of expansion been any faster than it was, there would have been no possibility for anything beyond simple atoms to form, because they wouldn't have had the time to glue together with those atomic forces. So there was just no possibility. In fact, he said there was a possibility, but it was he calculated this, I don't know how, a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of 1%. That's pretty small. Okay, well, we're lucky it wasn't a little bit faster. But he looked at it the other way, and he says, well, what if it was a little bit slower? And then the cosmologists, the astronomers who research that, say, well, you know, had it been slower, the whole universe would have expanded for a while and then come in and gravity would have collapsed it on itself. So how much slower? About a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of 1%. So you start saying, well, what are the odds of that? I mean, there was a fellow by the name of John Horgan, who gave a story about the odds of a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of 1%. And later on, Wayne Dyer picked it up and used it quite a bit. And it was a 747. And what it was is that you would have a tornado that rips through a junkyard, and it throws all the trash around, and after it gets through, there's a working 747 sitting on right there. That's how small the odds of a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of 1% is. So this is according to people who have, who are scientists, cosmologists, astronomers, this is the odds that our universe is even here. So that's not proof of intention, but it certainly looks like the universe had an intention for stars and life to form, because those odds are so small. And it wasn't just those odds. There were other things. Entropy, the second law of thermodynamics. You know what that is. It says if you don't take care of your house, it gets really dirty. So everything looks for the highest probability state, which is disorder. Ordered states are very difficult to achieve. You have to work at them. Disordered states just happen by themselves because of entropy. Well, but entropy itself says that the stars and galaxies violate the second law of thermodynamics, because there shouldn't be any stars. There should be just disorder. But yes, there is. So without intention, our universe effectively violates the second law of thermodynamics. And if you start thinking, well, these are just researchers who aren't very good at it. Well, some of the top minds in science have said things. Here is a quote from Stephen Hawking, who is a physicist who is highly respected. He said, at the rate of expansion 1 second after the Big Bang had been smaller by even 1 part in 100,000 million, it would have recollapsed before it reached its present size. And on the other hand, had it been greater by a part in a million, the universe would have expanded too rapidly for stars and planets to form. Stephen Hawking, 1988. Now, one possibility that could exist where, with this tiny window of probability that quantum physics often says, is that there is an infinity of universes. That seems like a big stretch. I think it's more likely to say that we somehow accidentally got here or through intention than to say that there's an infinity of universes and we just happen to be in the one which there's some consciousness, or one of maybe a few. But anyway, most of them are dead and nothing going on out there. There's also physical life, which is a violation of entropy as well. The fact that you could have a body that has life, that has consciousness, the ability to think about itself, that is totally ordered. That is a total violation of entropy, which is a state of disorder. And if you don't believe all those odds, there's one more that Gerald Schrader, a researcher, did on gene mutations. And he said his research revealed that it would take hundreds of millions of years for the diversity of multicellular organisms to develop without some kind of intervention. But it actually happened geologically in 5 million years, from what science is telling us. So unless it was directed or intended by some outside force, the timing is inconsistent with the materialist theory that assumes that the process happened randomly. Now, that odds is also pretty low. It was roughly the same as trying to flip a coin 100 times and it coming up heads every time. So we're talking about, from various areas of science, the same kind of thing, saying that if it wasn't intended, at least it was just highly unlikely. So let's go on to the next topic, which is the woo-woo stuff. So to get there, I'm going to look at a few unusual measurements that also happen in science. Then I'll get into psychic phenomena and what science tells us about psychic phenomena. Albert Einstein was not exactly a dummy. But what we know is that the possibility that the spooky action of a distance, which is known as entanglement. Does anyone know what entanglement is in physics? Simply that one atom in one part of the universe can instantaneously affect another atom in another part of the universe. If you know the spin on one, you'll know the spin on the other. It's not dependent on any kind of method of transmission between the two. It does not travel at the speed of light. It is instantaneous. And Albert Einstein said that is spooky. And he wouldn't believe it. In fact, it wasn't until experimentation was able to show it that he finally said that, well, I guess God does play dice with the universe. And some people think that it is the root of psi, or psychic phenomena, because it's very similar to the old idea of the ether, which was long ago thrown away. But it was the concept that everything in the universe is interconnected somehow. And the fact that you would have an interconnection between atoms without any method of transmission between the two might be the same thing going on in psychic phenomena. Psi is not electromagnetic energy. That's one of the reasons that scientists want to avoid it, because it's not measurable by the traditional laws of physics. But yet Princeton's Boundary Institute found that there was a class of electrons that were affected by human consciousness as people reacted to emotional events. So what they did a few years back is they had 40 recording devices around the world that recorded kind of emotional states in the, I don't know, it was an electronic thing, but it was done through electronic media. And what they found is that before major tragedies such as 9/11 or tsunamis, there was always a glitch in this, and it was just a matter of a couple of seconds. And Dean Radin at the Institute of Noetic Sciences has researched this quite a bit. There is definitely some kind of effect in the physical world by emotional states. And it's almost like in advance of the thing happening. So it's almost like it's psychic. And some of Dean Radin's research has actually shown that people have emotional reactions to events before they happen. So something's going on there. Another area which was very weird is that people can change the shape of their DNA. The Heart Math Institute discovered that. And there were psychic cancer healings. And there's a story that I would like to say about that, which scientist Greg Braden found out that he went to the medicineless hospitals in China. And what they found is people were getting healed of cancer, bladder cancer, by basically what was prayer and meditation. And Greg Braden said, well, I don't believe it. So he went and he videotaped it, and he actually was able to see that it was happening while it was happening. And he thought, well, we've got to take this to Western medicine. We've got to take it to this. There's something here. But you ran into that same scientific bias. When the researchers viewed this, they all agreed that it was astounding, and that they said, when we find a cure for cancer, we've got to research this. And I thought, isn't that a little bit backwards? But it's the idea that no, it can't be happening just magically or something. We've got to find out what electromagnetic forces are going on here for this to be happening. I want to move past this because I'm running a little late. Part of what the scientific reluctance comes from the fact that science has always been based on experimentation and always on observation. There's we trust our perceptions, and our perceptions really can't be trusted. I mean, if you trust your perceptions, you see a flat Earth, you know, because you can't see it very far and you can't see around the planet. You think, well, the sun goes around the Earth, yeah, and if you trust your perceptions, you would say time is a constant. It always moves at the same speed in the same direction. You would say that, oh, radiation, you don't feel any pain, I guess it's not damaging. All those have been proven wrong. And another one that seems very odd to us if we think about it today is if you move at the speed of light, you would think, oh yeah, you can catch up with it. Science has found if you move at the speed of light and you shine light for it, it's going to move away from you at the speed of light. Twice the speed of light? No, but it's just everything is relative, and that was the theory of relativity that Einstein came up with. And other things like, oh, because black holes are not visible in the universe, they don't really exist. Well, they do exist. It's just that the gravity is so strong that light can't get out of it. In fact, because it's not going fast enough to get out because of it's being pulled in by gravity faster than the speed of light. And also, one more thing that appears to be true is that consciousness is produced by the meat of our brains and dies with the body. And the reason it feels kind of like that is because, you know, when people die, we don't hear much from them after that. But that's not true either. And I'll talk a little bit about messages from the other side. I get them myself. And some of them are quite eerie. Okay, let's carry on if I can. I took a quantum mechanics course at Rice. And at the time it was a lot of math, and it was nothing more than the power required for an electron to move from one orbit to another. And there was no indication at all that it had any spiritual dimension. It wasn't until later that some of this stuff started to be coming out and people started jumping onto it. A lot of people, though, carry it a bit too far. You know, some people in the woo-woo world say, oh, well, that's quantum mechanics or quantum physics, and they'll say, oh, this is due to quantum physics, and they don't even understand what they're talking about. Well, I don't understand quantum physics, but I know enough to know that what it can't say, and there are a lot of things that are not there, and people just like to take it and run with it. So I humbly admit that I'm not an expert on quantum physics, and maybe some of you can correct me if I go off on the wrong tangent, but the stuff I've read, I'm telling you. There's a group called the Skeptical Inquirer, which is part of that conscious, the people in science that claim that we should be disciplined in our research. And psychic stuff is all undisciplined and woo-woo, and there's nothing to it. And they've often kind of hit head-to-head with researchers who have done research and found that there's something to it, and then they say, no, there can't be anything to it. And in fact, the Skeptical Inquirer group, Ray Hyman there, once did a research on psychic phenomena. And he was having people pick one of 4 cards. And he consistently got them, you would expect people would get about 25% of them right. You know, 1 out of 4, 25%. And all the researchers were saying, well, you generally get between 30 and 34% right. And they did their own research, and they came up with 32%. And his idea was, well, you know, we obviously did something wrong because, you know, since psychic phenomena can't exist, we must have done something wrong. And it's kind of like, even when the data are showing you, your mindset says, this has got to be the way it is, so we're going to ignore it. Gary Schwartz, he attempted to use the scientific method to study psychic mediumship. He's from the University of Arizona. Anybody know who John Edwards is? Oh, yeah. And he decided John Edward would be a good person to research. And John Edward loved the idea because he said, all these people think I'm so hokey. I would love to have some kind of solid research. And they came up with it, and they found out that, yes, it was statistically significant that he was able to find mediumship messages on the order of about 80% correct, while most people get about 30% correct. And the Skeptical Inquirer people said the study was flawed. If on no other basis, then it couldn't be right, according to them. The National Science Foundation one time found that 60% of the US people believe in psychic phenomena. And you know what they said about that? They said it is an indicator of the deplorable state of science education in the United States. Oh well. Let me see what I said here. Oh, another piece of it, going back in history. In 1847, there was a doctor by the name of Ignaz Semmelweis. And he was delivering babies. And there were so many of them getting what's called puerperal fever. I think I pronounced that right. It's one of the most difficult words in the English language to pronounce. Puerperal is what I think it is. Anyway, he was washing his hands before he would deliver babies. And he found out, he said, you know, about 1/4 of them would get this fever, and now only about 1% of them get it. And he said, it's something to do with washing hands. Now, this was before Lister, this was before germ theory, any of that. So he actually published this stuff, and he was chastised so badly that he was imprisoned for not giving in on this. and was eventually killed in prison. And I just think, this was because people believed that strongly, that hand washing was, if you can't tell us why it works, then it doesn't work. Another story in this realm, I don't know if any of you know who Sonia Choquette is. I know her. And she gives the story of time dilation. There's a lot of stories of that, but I can only share a little bit here. One of them that I thought was so impressive is she was driving from Chicago to Denver, and in the middle of Nebraska, she has told this story, you may have heard it. Someone got out in the middle of the road and was in front of them and do this, and she hit the brakes and couldn't. And then they were so concerned, she and her friend, that they stopped and looked to see if they'd maybe hit somebody, and they hadn't. And they got back in the car, and they were 40 miles from Denver. Now, what's big about that is this had happened in the middle of Nebraska. They had just bought gasoline, and within a few seconds, they were 40 miles from Denver. Now, she said, I would not believe that that actually happened if I didn't have the gasoline receipt that showed the time when we bought the gasoline in the middle of Nebraska. And those kind of things are like, they don't happen very often, but when they do, it's like saying, there's something here. We don't know what it is, but there's something here. If we actually could get science to look at these phenomena, and it's starting to, really. But if we could do more, we could probably develop psychic abilities better. We could develop an understanding of these things. And maybe it's just something you can't study by science. Maybe it's in the realm of the spiritual. David Hawkins, in his consciousness calibration, said when you get to a certain level, it goes away from science and it gets into the spiritual. So essentially he was saying you can't study the spiritual from a scientific perspective. And that may be true. But there's no reason not to try. Okay, let me move on here. One of the reasons that we have that problem is obviously fraud, deception, and gullibility in the world of psychic phenomena. Trapdoors and all those things, and people who really aren't psychic but just want to use it for entertainment value or to make a living. So the whole field got kind of, not really destroyed, but people didn't trust it, and they said it's all garbage, even the part which isn't. So there's a certain justifiability in that because of the gullibility, the fraud that's happened over the years. Even Madame Blavatsky, the famous psychic, was known to have some of her own little tricks, even though she was quite real, I think. She would enhance her psychic abilities a little bit. Sylvia Browne claimed to have 80% accuracy, and it wasn't 80%. It was pretty good, but it wasn't 80%. So how does quantum physics really kind of hint at psi? Well, for one, energy and matter are the same. We know that. They're simply a matter of the frequency of the spin. That's not quite right, but anyway. The Copenhagen interpretation of atomic level of quantum physics says that at the atomic level we alter our reality by observing it. Also, the Michelson-Morley experiments with light showed that if you observe light, it's a particle. When you don't observe it, it's a wave. That is just so weird that it says in a way that consciousness plays a role in matter creation. And physicist Peter Russell, who incidentally was quite an atheist, concluded in his studies that space and time are not the fundamental issues underlying reality, that it's actually consciousness. And he wrote a book later called From Science to God, where he came to a belief in God through his scientific research, which was that it can't be unless there's some kind of intention going on here. And it really, there's more and more research in quantum physics that's going into the direction of saying that consciousness itself creates physical reality, because the act of observation affects the physical form. There are studies of people being able to affect their DNA by their own thought process. And in one of the weirder things, people who have multiple personalities, they've actually discovered that sometimes different personalities have different eyeglass prescriptions. Now, how can that be? You would think that if it's really solidly physical, that the person's going to have the same prescription for his eyeglasses, whether he's in one personality or the other. But it kind of says, well, maybe the mind is affecting this. And they go into the optometrist, and one of them's got one prescription, it's the same person, the other one's got another. Quantum physicists John von Neumann and Eugene Wigner also attempted to make sense of the strangeness of quantum physics without clinging to the deterministic theories, which would require things like an infinity of universes, because that just seems just too unlikely. So they found that the conscious electric signals in the brain and light properties affected by observation could not be a physical process, so something outside the physical is necessary for reality. And they suspect it's consciousness. And again, that's back what Peter Russell was saying. And here's yet another one who took it even farther. Olivier Costa de Beauregard said that the non-classical implications of quantum physics demand, that was the word he used, demand that psi phenomena exist. And I don't have the knowledge, and I couldn't go into the depth of that, but he had written a book on it, and it just like followed all of the logical arguments why it's got to exist, and he says it's the same thing as quantum physics. Okay, then you get into the dilemma then, if consciousness creates reality, is there only one consciousness? You know, it's like God, one, and that, well, don't we all feel like we got our own individual consciousness? Wouldn't we be creating our own separate realities if our consciousness created reality? Well, this is where I say it's getting hokey. But it does kind of lead to the same thing, where science is now saying that one consciousness, that everything is one consciousness. And again, quantum physics is telling us what religions have said with different words for centuries. So, and I'm going to close off and go on to the third topic. I really need to get moving here. And that is psychic phenomena. What evidence do we have scientifically for psychic phenomena being real? Almost all of it is statistical. We don't know what's going on. As you would know, in a group of consciousness study people, we don't know what consciousness is, so how are you going to study it? We know it exists, but how do you go beyond that? All what we can say is that statistically, psychic phenomena are real because they've been through meta-analysis of thousands of studies over decades. The odds of it not being real, again, are in the realm of over 1 in a billion. That it's got to be something there. We just don't know what it is. And this was that story about you pick one of the 4 items. You would expect to get 25% right. Repeatedly, people come in 32% right. And what's even more interesting than that is you can get better at psychic phenomena by practicing it, as anyone who's good at it knows. And that people who meditate or do it professionally get these about 50% right. Now that to me is, again, don't know why, but something's there.
When you say right, do you mean is there like a certain one that just goes the best?
Well, in this case, it would be like you have 4 choices. Someone has picked a card.
Okay.
And they're asking you, which one did that person pick?
Okay.
And you say, and people get 32% of them right repeatedly. Now that, of course, is not perfect. It's not very applicable to a real life because you can't rely on it. But nonetheless, it's a lot more than chance would say it should be. And research is now being done at IONS, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, at Duke, at Princeton, the association called PAIR, which I think may have folded, partly because of that scientific bias. At the Windbridge Institute in Arizona, they're studying mediumship. The International Study for the Study of Subtle Energy and Energy Medicine, that terrible name of ISSSEEM. The IANS group, the International Association of Near-Death Studies. I know some of you, I think I've seen some of you there. And British universities have been doing a lot of research in that. Okay. What do I got here? One of the reasons that we have problems with research is that there's not a whole lot of it. Dean Radin at IONS once said, if the amount raised for cancer research throughout the world was spent in a 24-hour day, the amount spent in psi research throughout history would equal 43 seconds. So there is somewhat of a bias of studying this stuff. I want to give you one of the stories I really like. You may have heard this one, but it again shows the statistical unlikeliness of something happening. This little town of Beatrice, Nebraska. On March 1st, 1950, the West Side Church was completely destroyed by a boiler explosion. It happened at 7:27 in the evening. Now, 7 minutes before that was when the choir practice in the church was supposed to start. 7 minutes before the blower. They typically had 15 people there. On that particular night, there was not a single person there, not even the director. And they were still supposed to meet at 7:20, but there was no one there at all. And the odds were so small of that happening, and if you assume that maybe 1 out of 4 that someone might be 7 minutes late, that all 15 people were not there when they were supposed to be, the odds was 1 in 1.1 billion. So the researchers said, we got to find out what's going on here. So they contacted these people who were normally in the choir, and they had all these different things happen. I just didn't feel well, or something didn't feel right, or my car wouldn't start, or I was reading a book and I forgot about it. It was like they all had reasons, but you kind of start thinking, is there something psychic going on there? And what is true is that, and this has been verified over and over by people like Dean Radin at the IONS, is that when a disaster happens, almost always there seem to be fewer people there than were usually there. When 9/11 happened, they found out there were like 400 or so people, fewer in the first building that would normally have been there on that day of the week. Airline accidents. Almost always the news will say something like, well, it was fortunate that there were fewer people on the jet than there usually are. So why was that? And then on the other hand, is why were there any people there? Why did some people get on board anyway? And well, it's pretty clear that, if I'm boarding a jet and I get a psychic feeling that something's wrong with this jet, I'm going to think, well, if I don't get on board, I'm going to have to pay more to change my flight. I'm going to have to, get there late. So it better be like hit me in the stomach rather than just like the waft of a little bit of a gentle psychic feel. And I have had experiences like that. I'll share one of them with you right now. Probably shouldn't, but people like stories. I give tours, and the people, they perk up when I tell a story. When I give them the fact what happened here in 1888, they don't care. Well, anyway, this story happened to me about 5 or 6 years ago. I was going to a potluck for a Christmas party. And I took my dog out for a walk, and I started getting stomach ache. And I was in the middle of the PhD program, and I was studying psychic healing on top of it. And it got so bad that I said, oh my God, I gotta go home. And I got in the hot tub, and it was maybe it's just like muscle spasms. And it was really getting pretty serious, and my dog wanted to stay out in the cold, and I thought to be sitting next to the hot tub, and I said, no, I got to go in. I went into the tub because I could get hot water. Anyway, I went into a meditation because I was thinking, I can't go to this party. I'm going to have to go to the emergency room. And I went into this meditation, and I got this very clear message that said, don't go to the party. I said, well, I'm pretty cynical about stuff like that. Don't go to the party. So I decided not to go to the party. At this point, I was in such pain that I wasn't going to party anyway. I was going to the emergency room, if anything. And immediately it went away when I said, all right, I'm not going to the party. And it happened so quickly that I thought, what happened there? So I went back into my meditative state. I said, why, what happened here? Said, you're not supposed to go to the party because you're needed for something. And I thought, oh, that's so hokey, you know, all this kind of crap, you know, maybe something would happen. And the message was very clear, you're needed for something. Okay. Well, then I said, well, I prepared this huge bowl of fruit salad. What am I going to do with that? Is it okay to eat? Is it maybe food poisoning from that while I was snacking on it? I said, no, it's okay. But I'm cynical again, and I said, well, are you sure? So it's okay. And I never really found out what happened there, but it was the only time in my life where I had been so sick that I thought I was going to have to do something, where as soon as I decided not to do what it asked me not to do, it completely went away. And I did a health checkup later, and there's nothing wrong. So I don't know what happened. Anyway, it says that people who believe in psychic phenomena, and this is research too, are more likely to be accurate in psychic tests than people who do not. So again, it has to do with maybe practice or maybe just believing it. And, you know, I always love the title of Wayne Dyer's book, You'll See It When You Believe It, because you have to make that decision, you're going to do it. And this was researched by Gertrude Schmeidler at the City University of New York in 1973. Okay, let me get to that question I mentioned earlier. Why don't psychics win lottery jackpots? Okay, we know pretty much statistically it's real. We know pretty much that 32% is a lot higher than the 25%. But we also know that it's not 100%. So there's going to be a lot of errors. The research hypothetically came up with picking lottery numbers psychically improves your chances about 5 times from picking them randomly. But in a Powerball game, the odds of winning the jackpot are 1 out of 292 million on a single draw. So even if it's 5 times, it's still 1 out of 58 million. So you're not going to have a lot of news stories that say psychics win the lottery. And the second part of this, I think, is very fascinating. It was research done by the Silva Foundation, which says that if you have a self-serving motivation and you're using psychic power, or you're praying psychically, but it's self-serving, that it drops down to almost nothing. If you reward people when you're picking those 4 things for doing it, it goes to 25% roughly. And that's so fascinating to me, because it says that it's almost like there's an intention that psychic phenomena are supposed to be used to help people. And if you want to use it to help yourself, it's not going to work. And I recall the famous Sylvia Browne saying at one time, she said, many times she could find someone's lost purse or something. And she said, but if I lose mine, it's gone. I think that, again, says there's just something intended about it. And then again, we're kind of hinting at science, whispering spirit. These are my 2 puppy dogs. Ashley, you know that. She took care of Greta when I was on the trip last week. But anyway, there's been research by Rupert Sheldrake on animals know when their owners are coming home. And they also have psychic connections. And my dog, Daisy, I have 3 times in my life I've gotten the idea that I'm going to give her a bath. She hates baths. I get the idea, and she's hiding behind the bed. I thought, how did she know that? Do I give off a smell? Am I giving what kind of hit? Something's going on there. And another one that was really wonderful this year, on March the 12th, 2017. Does anybody know what happened that day?
It was my birthday.
Oh, great. Well, I don't think that was what the dog was thinking. That was the first day of advanced time, or daylight savings time this year. These pooches, my friend who lives with me, David Hall, who's lived with me for many years, comes home from work at 11:30 at night. He works at Visa, very close to here. And he gets home at 11:30. So those dogs go out at 11:20 every night to wait for him to get there. And of course, that's regular schedule. You can think, well, they just know the time. So I figured on the day we advanced the clocks, they wouldn't do it. Because, you know, it was 10:20 the day before. At 10:20, they went out and waited for him to come. Well, it was 11:20 now, but did they know that we changed the time? And I thought, but there has been quite a bit of research on animal psychic phenomena, and that it does exist with them too. They don't do many studies, but they have found that there's something more. It's harder to study animals, obviously. Okay, let's go on. I'm so happy this is working. The next topic is the consciousness survival beyond death. Clearly churches tell us that, spiritual traditions tell us that. Almost every religion tells us that. Some people say Judaism doesn't, but it does. There's a part of Judaism that does talk about the afterlife. Buddhism, there's a program in Buddhism, I don't know if I have the name of it, but also talks about the afterlife. So almost all religions seem to have it. So it must be grounded in something beyond just, you know, random noise. There's some tradition going on there. So people like the Windbridge Institute in Arizona, Julie Beischel is in charge of that. I talked to her. They do research on mediumship. And almost all of these people that are pretty good as mediums, psychic mediums, like John Holland, John Edward, Susan Giesemann, she was just speaking recently in New Braunfels, Lauren Rainbow, all of them said they know that we live beyond death. And I thought, that's impressive. I believe it, but I don't know it. And I more and more I can kind of feel it, and I do get these messages from beyond, but I don't really know it. But all these people who are really good at it say they know it, so apparently there's something going on there. Speaking of which, I was at a cruise once where there was a woman behind me I talked to before the event. It was a John Holland mediumship event. And we just hobnobbed, and then John Holland said, there's somebody in this section I'm getting a very definite message for, and it was right in our section. She was sitting right behind me. And it turned out it was a message for her. And she started crying. And after the thing was over, I asked her, why did you cry? I mean, I don't mean to be rude, but what is it made you cry? She said, John Holland told me a message from my husband that nobody on earth knew. I never told anybody. He and I were the only two people that knew it, and it was very specific. It was like something we did at some restaurant in Paris on the night and somewhere in 2004, and this is what happened. And she said, how could he know that? It must be real. So, you know, that's maybe why people like John Holland believe. They know. Okay. I don't know how much time I'm running. Am I still okay? Or do I need to start wrapping up or need?
About 20 more minutes.
Oh, good. I find it relying on faith is frustrating to me because I had this kind of numbers nerd part of me, the left brain part of me that always has got Missouri, show me, show me. And my faith is that I believe in an afterlife, and I'm a very spiritual person, but I still want to know it. I want to have the empirical evidence. And one of the things that's starting to be found as much as we can about consciousness study is that the brain does not create consciousness. It's basically meat. Meat doesn't create matter, consciousness. And so the theory is that the brain is a receiver of consciousness, not the generator. Many of you probably have run across that. So it would explain some things. For example, if a person has got sodium pentothal or propofol or something, they're knocked out, they're going to have a surgery or something, where does the consciousness go? Well, the consciousness is assumed to still be there. It's just that, just like a television that doesn't work or a computer that doesn't work, something's wrong with it. The signal, the consciousness signal is still there. It's just that the receiver is not able to pick it up. And what evidence do we have for consciousness survival? I don't know if I want to go into all of this. one of the strongest things is probably the near-death experience. Again, a woman I talked to recently, PMH Atwater, shared a story with me that, again, I like the stories, so here goes. This woman, it was last year sometime, she had a traffic accident. They thought she was dead. But she was taken to the emergency room and they were able to revive her. And as soon as they revived her, she's so excited. She said, I saw Dad, I saw Dad. And he told me he could stay, but I had to go back because I wasn't finished yet. And the doctor says, the family's all been brought over here, and they all say, well, you know, she's being crazy. She's talking out of her head. Dad's alive. We talked to him on the phone this morning, blah, blah, blah. And the doctor says, get the dad on the phone. We need to try to calm her down because she's in no shape for all of this emotional. And they tried to do it, and they couldn't get through the dad. The story was that he had a heart attack a few minutes before her traffic accident. And PMH Atwater, who's been researching near-death experiences for decades, she looks over to me, she says, and they think that's oxygen deprivation? Another thing about energies. There has been some research on this area. Dr. Ian Stevenson had 2,416 cases of young children who had detailed past life memories, including memories in a foreign language that they had never studied, or a musical instrument that they did not play in this life, and yet had memories of how to do it. And there was this one woman, Swarnlata Mishra, was a woman who had very detailed memories of where her previous life had been. She would recognize people. She would look at old photos and she'd say, well, you know, that's them, but they look a lot older now. Something's wrong. Or she knew how to get around the town she had never been in this life. And all those kind of things. If you want to get a lot of detail on this, there's a book here by Dr. Chris Carter called Science and the Afterlife Experience, where he goes into all of these stories. I actually had, again, something similar myself. I have had through my life vivid memories of being an Anasazi Indian. And so I meditated on that. What is this about? You know, this is a good Catholic boy going into craziness again. And they told me, oh, you were in the Winchester Mountains in Arizona. And I thought, that's stupid. Winchester is a British word. That's not something we have mountains in Arizona. So I tried to look up these mountains in Arizona because I could remember the desert. I can remember the buffalo that I was hunting and all this stuff. But there's no mountains there by Winchester Mountains. Well, I found out a little later when the Google Maps started coming out that there is a Winchester mountain range in Arizona. It's about 50 miles east of Tucson. But the Anasazi Indians were never there because they were up in the Four Corners region. I was reading the newspaper about 4 years ago, and something went up my spine. It was like, it says, Anasazi settlement discovered 200 miles south of where the farthest south we knew that they existed, somewhere in southeastern Arizona. It turns out it was in the Winchester Mountains. And I thought, oh my God. So that's another one of my stories, but it's true. I'm not making it up. Okay, another person who I have had the pleasure of talking to is a guy named Eben Alexander. Talked to him on an elevator in California one day. And he has written this book called Proof of Heaven. He was a neurosurgeon. He journeyed into the afterlife. Anybody know about him?
Yeah,
He's spoken to ions. He's spoken to ions, I think. And his story is so amazing because he was guided in the afterlife. His brain was mush. He never believed in any of this stuff. He was a neurosurgeon. He said it was all garbage. But when he had his own problem and his brain was mush, he had a week-long period which he was in a coma. And during that time, he was guided around in this glorious world, which he cannot describe because it was so great, by a woman that he never knew. And then he had been adopted, too, so he never knew his own parents. He found them a couple of years later, and they had a picture of this woman on the piano. And he says, that's the woman that guided me around when I was on the other side. And who is that? She said, that's your sister. She died a few years ago. He never knew he had a sister. But he recognized the thing immediately. The picture is like the woman who guided him around on the other side. Okay, let's go on to, I'm going to try to zip along a little faster here now. These are some of the objections to why people don't believe that near-death experiences are anything more than hallucinations. But we do have lots of times where people witness something during a near-death experience that might have happened many miles away. And what's good about this scientific exploration is you can verify sometimes what they saw. So one fellow saw a highway sign in a place he'd never been, and he read what was on it, and people who were there said, yeah, that's what the highway sign says. There was a man who was so myopic he couldn't see anything without his glasses. He was in a near-death experience without his glasses and was able to read things all around. They all say that you have hyper senses, and you can see 360 degrees around you. Not all of them, but most of the people who report near-death experience say that. Anybody here had a near-death experience? A couple of them. Maybe you can talk about it later. I haven't. No. I almost had an out-of-body experience once, but my dachshund brought me back. I was getting all these vibrations. It's like, hey, something's happening here. And then she put her head on my thigh, which is like, what's going on, Daddy Gary? And and immediately when that happened, it kind of went away. Several other stories are those that, oh gosh, you may have known the story about the woman Stella in the hospital in Washington State. She had a near-death experience on the operating table, and she was witnessing what was going on from above, like is so common in these. And after it happened, and she was recovering, she told the people, I saw everything happening, but you should get that light fixture's got 2 dead roaches on the top of it. and they poo-pooed it. They said, you know, we have a clean hospital here. We don't have dead roaches on the, but just to, you know, make her feel better, they got the ladder out and found 2 dead roaches on the top of the light fixture in the operating room. And there was another woman who saw a shoe on the outside 3rd-story floor of a hospital, and she described all the little brushes on the shoe and where the shoelace was, and they determined there's no way she could have seen that unless you were actually hovering outside the hospital on the 3rd floor, because it was in such a little niche that they discovered it, but she had no way of knowing it other than being in a near-death experience or out-of-body experience and going out and doing that. One of the fascinating things I find about the International Association of Near-Death Studies here in Austin is I've gone to some of the meetings, and sometimes people will relay their why me attitude. And I always thought, well, you know, was it that bad? Oh no, it was so great that I was like, why did I have to come back here? And this one woman next to me said, she loves her children dearly, but she would have in a heartbeat stayed if she wasn't told she had to come back. So, okay. One more that's really pretty impressive to me as a statistician. When Raymond Moody first started doing his research in near-death experiences, he had already gone through hundreds of cases. People who were of all religious faiths, no religious faith, anything like that. 100% of them said they believed in an afterlife. Now you've had some exceptions since then, but that original research is like nothing in statistics happens that way. If you say 2 + 2 is equal to 5, or let's say if you say 2 + 2 is equal to 4, how many people agree with that? You're not going to get 100%. So it was just so amazing that 100% of the people, and they did have some exceptions, but they found out later most of the exceptions were people who didn't really have a transcendent near-death experience. They had a close brush with death but didn't really have the experience. And of course not everybody has one. In fact, it's a relatively small percentage of people actually have them. Okay, on to communicating with people who die. Why is it so hard? You know, it's one of the worst things about death is that it's hard to communicate with people after they die. But Gary Schwartz did research on this at the University of Arizona. He found that professional mediums were 85% accurate regarding a particular person's death, with their appearance, personality, hobbies, etc. The average person, about 30%. The reason I think that it's so rare for most of us, one is that we don't know how to do the communication. Pam Grout wrote a book called EMC Squared, I think, in which she said, the reason we can't communicate with them is that they're trying to send us messages and we're the ones with our damn phones off the hook. And it's kind of like we don't know how to find the message. But sometimes people pray very hard for a message and they don't get one. So why is that? Again, no one knows that answer. But one thing that has happened in a lot of cases with mediumship is people who are very deeply religious in a particular sect, a particular religion, they are not on the other side. It's kind of like they may have been very, very strong about it, and on the other side, it's kind of like they don't want to go there. And I kind of think, well, maybe their perceptions have been exalted and etherealized. They've gotten the facts now, and they don't have to rely on the things that we're told that exist. One thing, though, is that it's sometimes very hard to demand them because probably we're not supposed to know. There's something about this earth experience we're supposed to experience, and if we knew that we were going to live on for a fact, maybe we wouldn't do what we're supposed to do here. That we would take the easy road out and say, well, I'm going to die anyway, and I'm going to go on. So there's something that we're supposed to learn here. And also because 88% of the research on after-death communication, mostly it arrived unexpectedly. People may have requested it, but it came out of the blue. The one that I think is fascinating in here is right there. That when two or more people were present, when an apparition from a person on the other side happened, they would not only both see the apparition, but they would see it with perspective. So if I'm standing here, I would see the front, and if you were sitting back there, you would see the back of the person. Which says that there's something more than just hallucination or imagination going on. There's some entity there, some kind of etheric body or something. My mother, who was a nurse, was dealing with a man who was dying, and he didn't want to die, and he said, hold my hand, hold my hand. And he said, I don't want to go alone. And she was very gently trying to say, well, you know, you're going to have to go alone. But she held his hand. She told me that within a couple of days later, she was in the hospital. He died that night. She was in the hospital, and she turned a corner, and he was standing there with his plaid pants on, and he smiled at her. It was like, and he was clearly recognizable to her. And she said, and then he just disappeared. And she said, ooh. So I guess he came back to thank her for holding his hand. A lot of times there's electronic messages. God, I've been giving all these personal stories. I'm not sure how good they are for scientific evidence, but I'll give you another one. Ashley knows this one. My dad died on Flag Day, and I was heading from Austin back to El Campo to arrange the funeral with my mother and brother and all. And I was going through Bastrop, and they had all these flags up. And I said, look, Dad, they got the flags up for you, because he was 4 years in World War II and all that. And immediately, my seatbelt chime starts to chime. Now, that's not too weird, except I'm wearing my seatbelt, and it's going bing, 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 bing. And I thought, oh, God, now I got to get this fixed, too. I don't know how long is this guy's going to go all the way home. And I said, well, and then it stopped, and I said, well, maybe it's a message. You know, they give electronic messages sometimes. And I said, well, thank you, Dad. That in itself is not so weird. But several months later, when I was driving back from a Rice football game in Houston, I was going on a country farm to market road. And I'm driving along 70 miles an hour, 65 probably. And all of a sudden it starts going ding, ding, ding. Again, I'm wearing it. And So I slowed down and I started struggling with it. The last time that happened was the day Dad died, which was several months earlier. I never got it fixed. And I slowed down, and then this car ran a stop sign and went vroom, right across the road right in front of me. And I thought, well, had it not been dinging, I would have gone right into that, or they would have gone right into me. And I said, thank you, Dad. So I'm thinking, well, maybe. But oftentimes apparitions use clothing or scent. Some people say, why do apparitions appear with clothing? Do clothes have ghosts? Why don't they appear naked? I mean, why should they have clothes on? But mostly it's because it seems like they want to use that as communication, some scent that was common to them, or some dress that was common to him. Like my mother said, he was wearing his plaid pants, which I always saw him in. I am just about coming full circle here, and it's about time for some questions. We haven't, most of the evidence scientifically for the spiritual life is statistical, partly because we can't research it. There's a lot of evidence for psychic phenomena being real, on the order of 1 out of a billion or so, with all of the meta-studies over thousands of trials. There's a lot in quantum physics that we know from the research. There's a lot of cosmology that says that we shouldn't be here at all. So it's no proof, but there's something very definitely giving us evidence, and there's some intention, it seems to me. And so the fascinating payoff to me about the gap between science and spirituality narrowing is that what we believe to be magic can be real. Any questions? Yes?
I had a question about your story about the potluck party.
Oh, yeah.
That you were needed for.
I never found out. I remember thinking that was a very hokey answer, because you always hear people say, well, you need to come back to Earth in a near-death experience because you're needed for something. But I never found out. But I never found, that's the problem with following psychic intuition, is you don't really know what would have happened had you gone the other way. You know,
Sometimes it's not for you to know.
yeah, it could be. You know, Ron Roth, who was a priest, who said he had an intuitive hit one time not to take, there was 2 different ways to get way. He decided to go one way because it would have been easier. And he said, you know, I got the feeling that something's wrong with that. And they had a traffic accident. But the thing is, you never know. Sometimes you follow the intuition and nothing bad happens. So you don't know. Would something bad happen had I gone the other way? You don't know that either. That's the problem with, you know, experimentation. You don't have the data. You can't really know.
Well, you were having such a resistance, you might have gone on to that event. And sometimes they'll know how to hit you with something that you'll respond to.
Could be.
It will override this other decision that you're making, to override something that you think is wrong.
Well, it was a cold and foggy December night, and I kind of wondered maybe if there was a traffic accident in store for me had I gone there or something. But again, I don't know.
You didn't.
I didn't have the accident, so I must have done something right. Yes, sir.
Gary, the title of your book really is what Einstein was saying when he talked about science and religion are going to come together to be true.
Yeah.
And when I read it the first time, I thought, boy, that's 200 or 300 years away. It's today.
Mm-hmm.
And on the 4th, let me just get this exactly right. On the 26th of April, the Dalai Lama said, spirituality without quantum physics is an incomplete picture of the universe. So it's here. We've arrived. That's amazing.
Well, we have in the sense that, you know, even when I was a kid, the concept was still pretty serious that religion was over here and science was over there. And even though quantum physics was already in existence by then, and Einstein's relativity theories were all in existence, but people like, you know, it's even interesting that Isaac Newton, a man who is kind of like the father of materialist science, very deeply believed that there was a divine design, and he had to suppress it because the people at the time said you need to make it less hokey. So basically that's what it was. He had to make it all just very materialistic. Yes?
We had a fellow here, Ron Bryan, he's a atomic physicist and retired emeritus. What's that college in East Texas, the agricultural college? That's where he's
Oh yeah,
Anyway.
Tammy?
He's had very interesting experiments. And he actually gave a lecture here about 3 years ago. And what he's going to do, and what he's in Germany now, and he was doing it here, but he's in Germany with some associates, and he's going to aim a laser at some kind of like sodium or some kind of element. He's going to knock off an electron.
Oh yeah,
trap
yeah.
it. Did you hear about that?
Yeah, I think I have.
Knock off an electron, trap it in a magnetic field, or he calls it a box, and then he's going to have a psychic potentially change the spin because each atomic particle has.
Is he going to use Elizabeth Rauscher?
Pardon?
Is he going to use Elizabeth Rauscher as
No,
the
he's going to
psychic?
use McGonagall. He said.
Oh,
And McGonagall was associated, of course, with.
You know, Dean Radin has done research on something similar. When light being observed is a particle, and when it's not observed, it's a wave. They've actually done research at ions where a person can do that psychically.
Yeah, that's.
The observation doesn't have to be physical observation. They can psychically do it, and it still becomes a particle.
Yeah, that's what it's going to be. It's going to be a psychic thing. And McGonagall is going to try to change the spin with attention either left or right and set up sort of a Morse code and channel it to a monitor.
Well, thank you all for coming and being here. I'm going to talk. Oh, okay. Well, you said they brought me the autograph. So I'm glad to see.